Okay, guys, so now what we're going to do is we're going to create a kind of diagram that visualizes what we have just gone over. So this might help you pull the different parts of the text, Bentham's concepts together, and the different moves he's making in asserting what he does through his non-moral statements, his metaphysical claims about human reality, his meta-ethical claims as he moves from those metaphysical presuppositions or the claims that are metaphysical presuppositions or stating as such, to naming his principle of utility and explaining what all is entailed in applying the principle of utility. And in doing so, I'm going to give you a formulation of the principle of utility in a single sentence to capture what he says in paragraph 4. And in that sentence is going to be constructed as a moral statement, as a moral rule. You might have been given a version of it in the ebook and the reading, but we're going to use my version because my version helps you to focus correctly on exactly what the rule is telling you. I think the one that's given in the book, it's too fuzzy, and I need you to have a version that will help you make sure that if I ask you to apply it or use it or talk about it, that it'll help you stay focused on what it is that the moral rule says. So let's go ahead and get started on that. So you'll want to turn your sheet of paper sideways like this. So this is sideways. And then about an inch from the top, we're going to title this diagram with a question. So how does Bentham arrive at his, and I'm going to use GMP, general moral principle. All right, so then I'm going to leave about maybe 2 inches or a fourth of the page to write notes in this column, and then this will be the main part of my notes or my diagram. So I'm going to make that line a little bit more crisp. Okay, all right. So as you know, he starts with his metaphysical foundation, right? So he has a metaphysical foundation, right? And what is the metaphysical foundation of his system, right? As he calls it, his system, and what he means is his theory. So that is going to be this. And in fact, actually, let's leave 2 inches to the left as well. There. So now we have 2 columns. We can put notes on both sides. So here, this is going to sound familiar because you read about this and you read this claim, at least in some form, in your reading. So the only factors operating in human behavior are the desire to, we could say the desire of humans. Oh, it already says humans, so we don't need to repeat that. In human behavior are the desires, I should say is the desire to avoid pain while gaining as much pleasure as possible. So this is what you read about in the book that the author talked about. He said that this view has come to be known as psychological, do you remember the H word? Hedonism. So at the foundation of Bentham's system or theory, right, that gives rise to his articulation of the general moral principle is a theory that has come to be known as psychological hedonism. He didn't call it psychological hedonism, but that is what this view has come to be called. And when you are reading about or learn that someone holds the theory of psychological hedonism, what you're getting is a set of metaphysical presuppositions about human reality and existence and being and how we operate in relation to ourselves and, of course, the cosmos and others. All right, so now, it is based on this. It is based on his metaphysical presuppositions about human reality, right? His psychological hedonism, that he infers something else. So what is meant by inference? You should write this down as I might ask you about it. Oh my goodness. I don't know if you've been seeing all this, but if you have not seen all this, you need to pause the video and write this down. I just realized that you might not have seen all that. So pause the video if you didn't write that all down. Put those notes down there. Okay, so infers. So what is an inference? So an inference is an intellectual step of the mind. It is taken when you go from something that you currently believe or presuppose to be true, or at least plausible, to derive another belief that you think is true or at least plausible. Okay, so you start from something that you already think or believe is true or plausible, and you take a step beyond that to assert that something else on the basis of what is already believed to be true or plausible is also true or plausible. So based on this metaphysical presupposition about human reality, psychological hedonism, he infers what? What else does he think is true, given that he already thinks that this is true? Well, he's going to infer this. The rightness, wrongness of an action, and of course, whenever I say action, you're also thinking of choices, decisions, behaviors. Action is a function of how much pleasure and pain is produced. Okay, so here what we've got are some metaethical discoveries. So it's a metaethical discovery that he believes he has made based on some metaphysical foundation, some metaphysical presuppositions. So this view right here has come to be known about something else that you've read about, and that is ethical hedonism. Okay, so the title of this document, of course, is How Does Bentham Arrive at His General Moral Principle? I have not yet stated to you the general moral principle, therefore we're not done. So then it's on the basis of this that, what do you think I mean by the upward arrow? Given what I did with the upward arrow earlier in this lecture, I mean he makes another inference. So he infers, okay, on the basis of this, believing this to be true, he derives yet another belief that he thinks is true on the basis of thinking this one is true, and that belief is named by the words principle of utility. Okay, now like I said, I'm going to give you a version that is very exact and precise, gives you enough detail in the rule to make sure that if you apply it, that you do so with sufficient precision. Like I said, the problem with the version in the ebook or the versions in the ebook is that they're too fuzzy, even if it's the philosophers. I'm trying to distill what we read in paragraph 4, right? The things to consider in paragraph 4 from our earlier video lecture. I'm trying to distill that into a moral claim in one sentence. So let's see if we can do this. So we're going to say one ought to choose the action that will result in the best balance of happiness over unhappiness I think I have too many N's there, don't I? Unhappiness for all involved. Okay, so then what we have here is a moral discovery. So remember from an earlier lecture, I told you how to think about the word ought, right? So we said that ought is, at least in this class, is typically used to name a moral value. Ought, if you ought to do something, we said what? That it's the right thing to do, but it's actually stronger than that. When we say you ought to do something, we're saying it would be wrong if you didn't. Okay, so you're obligated by morality to do something. And so this is telling us how we ought to choose, and you can see that it's talking about actions. Again, we can think of decisions and behaviors, choices, best balance of happiness, pleasure over unhappiness, pain for all involved. So I'm going to say more. We're going to break this down even further in another lecture. But for right now, I'm just trying to show you the big picture and the moves that he's making in his thinking. Again, we're practicing intellectual empathy. We're trying to see how he gets from this starting point, these metaphysical presuppositions, to these meta-ethical claims and discoveries, to this moral discovery, the construction of a general moral principle. All right, so then we're going to say that, so we've got psychological hedonism, ethical hedonism, and then here we just have your utilitarian rule, that is his general moral principle, okay? So this is a moral claim, right? We said that this is what? We said the metaphysical foundation, we have, this is basically non-moral statements, right? These are meta-ethical statements, and then this, of course, is a moral statement in the form of a general moral principle. So hopefully you're seeing how all my lectures tie together, right? So I lectured you on, I did a lecture on moral statements and moral arguments. We learned about two kinds of moral statements, particular moral judgments and general moral principles. We learned a little bit more about metaphysics and epistemology, just, a sense and a quick overview, but also about the fields of ethics. And you can see how I'm just now using these things. So from this point on, when I say, this is a metaphysical presupposition, I want you to know that I'm saying that this is what somebody presupposes to be true or plausible about reality. If I say an epistemological presupposition, you know that I'm saying this is what somebody thinks about knowledge or belief or opinion. When I talk about meta-ethics or normative ethics or applied ethics, I expect you to already know what I'm referring to with those words. So this concludes this version of this part of the lesson.